Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Welcome to the Saturday Night's Triumph Over Targeting podcast. I'm your moderator, Ella, and as you know, we have another very special guest, Dr. John Hall, with us. John is the author of Guinea Pigs, Technologies of Control, A New Breed, Satellite Terrorism, and he's a medical doctor, a board-certified physician with a degree in biology and science, and has a clinic in San Antonio, Texas that specializes in advanced biologic stem cell therapy and platelet-rich plasma therapy. He is a musician, an actor, and a film and television producer, and I imagine there's not much that he can't do. But most importantly, he is an avid activist and advocate for our community. And so I just want to say welcome, John. And I guess my first question is, how did you finally agree to come on the call? Was it my stubborn persistence or my bad jokes?
Probably your stubborn persistence. And I try to make myself available every now and again. But, as you can probably see, for most of you are probably on my Facebook page. And, man, it's gotten to the point where pretty much every minute is taken. And one thing I would like to elaborate on real quickly on that is, and this doesn't seem to be slowing down any. I mean, every morning I come to the office, there's easily 5 or 10 messages that the service has picked up from people that are, finding my office number, I guess, online. And it's never medical. Almost every message I get anymore is targeting. So it certainly seems to be accelerating, not slowing down.
Is there anything else you wanted to add to the introduction?
One thing I would like, I've had a lot of questions on my Facebook page about when Targeted the movie is coming out and Targeted the documentary. And one thing I will say, because I know that probably everybody listening, or just about everybody probably is a Facebook friend, one of the things that has delayed that is one thing I found out real quickly is to get help in the film industry, you kind of have to go ahead and immerse yourself into it. So, I had to, to meet the right people, the production people, film people, things like that, go ahead and kind of start doing some other things in order to meet those people. So rather than just, basically begging people to help with the production, most of the filming has been done for the documentary. We're talking to some more people about actually getting back on filming the actual feature film, which is not going to be a documentary specifically, because I don't want it to be, mainly because Targeted, the feature film, I think will access more of the non-targeted public, which is my idea, with pretty much everything I do anymore, is not necessarily aimed at targeted individuals as much as it's aimed at the non-targeted public. Because if we can convert most of them to understand that this is real, we'll have a much larger voice as far as trying to, force the government into having some type of a congressional hearing. Or another Rockefeller Commission or something of that sort to bring it to light. Because I still think as many of us that are being targeted, we're still a relatively small voice. And the reason that we chose to do a documentary and a feature film on that is you'll get the non-targeted public to rent your movie or to go to a movie theater and see it more often if it's presented as a feature film based on a true story than if it's a documentary. A documentary typically only gets in the people that have some vested interest in seeing a documentary based on what they're going through. But we are going to do both. It's just taken a little time because I had to kind of throw myself into some other projects to appease the people that are actually helping me, produce the other two. So.
Okay, great. And I guess let's go back into a little bit of your history here. How you first discovered that there was government programs that were experimenting on innocent people, and also my follow-up question to that is, did you know of any aspects of targeting prior to actually discovering it existed?
Yeah, actually, I knew quite a bit about it. Most of my family has been military and intelligence. So I mean, I kind of was born into it. I guess you could say not born into the targeting, but, born into knowing probably a little more about things like that and having connections to people that are in the position to know that are in government agencies. Never thought that, I'd heard about it, never thought it would happen to me, or certainly wouldn't happen to the girl I was engaged to. until, she came to me, with, the story saying, you're the only person I trust, but, I've got people that I don't know following me around everywhere I go. I'm under surveillance for some reason, and I'm not sure why. And then that's when the impetus for the first book, A New Breed, which was essentially based on her story, when I spent a bunch of money counter-surveilling her and wiring up her place for audio, and we caught the people that were breaking and entering, got their plate numbers, ran the plate numbers. Absolutely no question on the facts of who it is doing it in Texas. It is a former FBI agent. He was an FBI fraud investigator. After he retired from the FBI, he started a private investigative service. His son is a lieutenant colonel with the DOD, or was. His son was part of it. And when I say this, these weren't young men. When I say him and his son, this was a 65, 75-year-old retired FBI agent with a son in his 50s who had a son in his late 20s, early 30s. The whole family took part in the stalking. All of them were identified stalking. All of their vehicles were identified stalking. Once they knew that I knew who they were, and I started counter-surveilling them, then they started using rental cars and stopped using their own personal vehicles. So absolutely no question who was doing it here. Went to the police. I've done the medicine for SAPD for a long time. Actually, at that time, the lieutenant in charge of sex crimes had been a patient for a long time. He had no problems believing me. As I wrote in the book, he said, you get to a point where a story is so crazy, it's got to be true. So they listened to all the recordings, people in her place, her being drugged on Rohypnol. Occasionally, you could hear some of the actually transmitted vocals that were being bombarded at her on a digital recorder, which a lot of people have probably figured out that by now. But every now and again, you'll pick up what we term voice to skull or elf wave soundtracks. Every now and again, if it's positioned right, you'll pick them up on a digital recorder. Not routinely, but at that time, some of the voices that were actually in the room with her, you could hear. And then on a whole different RF level, you could actually hear some voices saying, you need to drink some more of the juice in the refrigerator, because they were drugging her through an antioxidant juice that she drank. It was like an acai berry type of thing that was loaded with Rohypnol, and was essentially using her as a sex slave. So that was the impetus for the first book, and what put me in contact with a couple of people that I knew that were still in the CIA to ask them if this technology had been commercialized. Was it still something that needed a clearance to get to, or had it been commercialized where anybody had access to it? And under no uncertain terms was told that it's still classified technology, as I wrote in the book, for war use abroad and not for domestic use. So, which told me everything I needed to know, that it is still classified, that most of these groups in every major city, there's got to be at least one person involved with clearance to give them access. From my counter surveillance, there does seem to be a hierarchy within the perpetrator groups. The people that are following you around and breaking into your house are usually not the ones that are actually accessing a computer and doing the electronic harassment. That can be done from another state. It can be done from across town. It doesn't have to be, door to door or behind the wall or from an apartment within your complex. It can be done as remote as they need to be. So that's kind of what actually took off the interest to go ahead and expose it. Once I saw that I wasn't going to be able to get them behind bars, then the next best thing was to change the name slightly and write a book to expose it. And like I said, even at that time, was not necessarily to bring TIs out of the woodwork and other people that are being targeted, because at that time I didn't know how vast it had been, but was to expose it to non-targeted people. But as soon as I did my first couple of radio shows, then that's when really I was enlightened as to how many people were voicing identical complaints. And an amazing thing, before the book ever actually released, I had a website up advertising the book for a couple of months, and actually had two other people from the state of Texas email me and identify the same PI group as harassing them in different cities in Texas. So, I mean, it wasn't only me that identified this group. It was at least two other people had identified this guy before the book was released.
And this was a government-related group. And I guess my other question would be, do you believe there are rogue groups?
Well, and I'll tell you, a lot of people have asked me that. The first book I wrote kind of under the assumption that it was possibly rogue groups hacking into the system in order to use it. And there was a very intentional reason that I wrote it that way. I didn't want to alienate the contacts that I have within government. At that time, I had contacts within Brook City base that actually do directed energy research. I had contacts within the FBI, and I had contacts within the CIA. And after talking to them, they basically were like, please don't just straight up blame this on the government at this point. So right. in order to keep them as contacts, I did kind of present it as hacking when I really kind of knew it wasn't. But I wanted to get the information out that it is happening in general. But then once guinea pigs came along, then I talked to my contacts and said, you know what, you have to have a clearance to have. You and I can't Google, mind control directed energy or directed energy weapons and get a key pass or a key fob to get onto a computer and access these weapons. We just can't. So I called them and told them, I said, you know what, guinea pigs is going to squarely blame it on where it needs to be blamed, which is ultimately the government. And even though, as I've explained before, after the Rockefeller Commission and after, the hearings when the FBI and the CIA and the DOD got caught, they wisened up. Instead of using front companies funded by themselves, basically what they're doing is they're giving access to retired, members of the intelligence community who run private investigative groups. Because that way, if the PI group finally does get busted, then they'll just say, well, they hacked into it, and we're sorry, and it's not our fault, and there'll be plausible deniability. So,
okay. Then I guess, an area that you know a lot about is the technology, and people have so many questions about it, and people, that's one area that seems to be the most difficult for TIs to grasp, and so I'd like to delve into the area of technology, if that's okay with you, and maybe talk about some of the delivery systems. And I know you'd mentioned in an interview, you said that you believe most of this is satellite-based, and I kind of agree with that on a personal note. And then you were saying that these satellites, they're based on that they base everything on our specific brainwaves, biometric parameters, and that it utilizes your facial and body identification. And then you'd mentioned something about DNA resonance might be something that they're using right now, and that's probably that's a good probability. So what are your thoughts on that? And maybe you can elaborate on those topics.
Well, one thing you have to remember, it's not one form of technology that they're using. It's a combination of many. Right. And that technology is changing and improving every day. And I mean, you can even see it in the way people are targeted. When my ex-fiancée was targeted, the group here had pretty much just gotten access to it. And like I said, I know every member of the group here using it. Actually, a couple of them I know personally. So, and I spent a lot of money counter surveilling. So, they were watched pretty close, and that's a lot of the way that I knew that the people that were running around following her in the cars, which I had people following them, weren't on computers, they weren't on cell phones, they were strictly boots on the ground. Right. It was people behind computers actually across town, about 20 miles away, that were actually doing the electronic part, which was the voices and the directed energy. And at that time, it was very evident that they really didn't know how to control it themselves. They were in an experimental phase themselves, because sometimes it would be real loud where just about anyone would hear it around you, because what a lot of people call voice to skull is actually an Elf wave-based transmission that kind of blankets the person or the home. And although it kind of sounds like a whisper that's right outside your head or maybe right outside your window, it's not true voice to skull all the time. Sometimes what I call Elf wave transmissions, it's an Elf wave transmission that picks up vibrations around you to be amplified for you to be able to hear it. And it is still person-specific. They have to work at it to get it that way, and I know this from experiencing it myself with her, that there were times where they would be communicating to her, and it was a communication that anyone would hear. You could hear it, the neighbors could hear it, sometimes loud crashes or booms of static that just seemed to come out of the atmosphere around the house. Matter of fact, one time it sounded like somebody keying up a a walkie-talkie with a loud click, that just kind of came out of nowhere. And even my neighbors looked, and I was outside, and they said, "What the hell was that?" Well, I knew what it was. They were trying to blanket the house with sound. Occasionally, when she would be communicating back, you could hear it. It wasn't the true microwave-based voice-to-skull. It was a transmission that requires vibrations, which is why a lot of people will describe that they only hear them under a ceiling fan or under a bathroom vent fan, or when a jet blows by and makes vibrations in the air, or when the wind blows through tree leaves. Anything that will actually displace air and cause vibrations in the air seems to actually pick up that signal and amplify it where you can hear it. But once they work with it for a while, they do figure out exactly what frequency and what magnitude, to where only you'll hear it and the people around you won't. And we found the same thing with some of the recordings, because some of that was recordable. I had recordings on Sony digital voice-activated recorders that you could tell a distinct difference between the voices in the room with her when she was being drugged and they were breaking in, compared to when you would hear a whole different kind of sound come in and say, "We need you to drink some more of the juice in the refrigerator." I mean, it was distinctly different. It was recordable. But in a lot of those recordings, it's still person-specific. So even though you may record it and you go, "No, it's right here. Can't you hear it? They're screaming vulgarities at me." Well, then you may play that recording for somebody else, and all they're going to hear is static, because the recording itself is often person-specific.
That's interesting. I wonder how they do that.
Well, and I've had a lot of people actually, send me sound bites going, "Well, can't you hear them explaining to me how I'm going to be killed or that they're attacking me?" And and I write it back and I said, "You know what? All I'm hearing is white noise." And I know they're really hearing what they recorded, but it still even picks up on a digital recorder as a frequency and a magnitude that's relatively specific to the victim. So, that's one of the things that we tried for a long time, was to get recordings of some of these people to show that it is transmitted sound, that it's not something you're hearing in your head or a psychiatric aberration. So.
Okay. And then an area that I know people like to discuss, and sometimes there's misinformation, so maybe you can clarify it for people, EEG cloning and EEG heterodyning. Maybe you can go into a little bit about that.
Yeah, and that exists. I've seen the research on that too. And that is how you actually control somebody. And, there's a difference between being harassed and being controlled. You can be controlled through your harassment, which means driven crazy. You're just driven to your wits' end, where you do something crazy or strike out against the wrong people, which is why I am always cautious to say, as target individuals, we can't glamorize violence. We can't idolize the people who actually use violence or killing as an answer to this problem. And I've seen a lot of that since Aaron Alexis and Myron May. And you've got to back away from that, because if they find that the group as a whole is going, he's a hero, that, they're already, as soon as you mention hearing voices, they're already going to be suspectful that you're a threat to society. And that is what's going to get you parked in front of a psychiatrist and get you California 5150 or some type of, mandated psychiatric care, which we all know is not going to help you. So you got to be real careful with that. But that is one of the ways they control you, because the brain can transmit. Malik figured that out in the 70s. The research that followed actually expanded on Malik's theory, which they did figure out. Persinger was one of the big ones in almost all of his research was in L-wave technology for the last 20 years. Figured out that if you do shoot two dissimilar frequencies in the brain, the two hemispheres will entrain two different frequencies, and they actually compete, and that interference wave is transmitted out, and it can be picked up just like a signal from any other radio or any other transmitter. And the EEG can be derived from that interference wave and altered in such a way that it can be re-entrained back to you to make you demonstrate or display whatever symptom that they want. And like you've heard me explain on radio shows, the easiest way to think about it is basically a catalog of EEG waveforms that correspond to aggression or depression or anxiety or nervousness or fast heart rate or headache. And once that's re-entrained into the person, then they will display those symptoms because essentially the brain controls everything in the human body, every single nerve, as a matter of fact.
And you were also mentioning even pain sensations too, itching, and some of that actually originates in the brain, and it's not an external stimuli causing that. So that would, I've heard that on one of your interviews too. Like some of that itching and things like that actually has to do with the.
That's why you can't block it. Because
right.
Now, not to say the directed energy attack doesn't happen. You can be attacked with microwave, with millimeter wave, with ultrasound, and they can cause bodily harm with those. Acoustic waves are a big one. But a lot of times when you have that weird sensation, whether it's pain or burning, you may notice that nothing you do can block it. No amount of shielding, nothing can block it, and that's usually because it's being generated at a brain level. The things that I can tell you for sure are generated at a brain level are what a lot of people think they're seeing, projections at night, holograms, or faces in the paint, or you'll look at a wall and it looks like there's writing in the paint, but you never can quite make out what that writing is. You can see that there's letters there, but the closer you stare at it, the more jumbled it gets, and you might get a word or two out of it, but then you can't get the rest of the sentence. The smell thing, a lot of the victims will complain that their feet always smell, or they have a rotten egg smell all the time, or a skunk smell all the time. That's by stimulation of the olfactory centers of the brain. It's not because you're not showering enough, or because you're not using enough perfume, or those are scents that they can actually stimulate in the brain. So, and that's why it never seems to go away. But
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, the visual disturbances are another big one.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I don't know if I ever mentioned this, but the woman that was doing the editing on both of my books was non-targeted until she started doing my editing. And one day, wide awake, she wasn't dreaming. She had actually finished typing, was laying in bed watching TV, and all of a sudden a swarm of hummingbirds started swirling around her light. And she said you could look at them and see that it was a brain aberration. And she screamed at them to stop, and then the hummingbird went away. So.
Wow. Yeah, that's remarkable. Especially since everything originates from the brain, and these people they know how to manipulate our brains, and in every sense that we experience, and I personally experience a lot of things that they can do like that, and just everything you touch, what you taste, what you see, what you hear, they can, all your perceptions and all your senses can be, what's the word, deceived or manipulated. That's the word I'm looking for. So, yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned to other people the thing, I call it brain pain, where it actually originates, in the brain, as opposed to being hit by a weapon, because they can trick you, too. Sometimes you think someone around you is hurting you, but it's really just brain pain. They're just doing psyops. Maybe you can go into that a little bit as well, the whole psyops that they do.
Well, and that you got to be real cautious of that. And I get a lot of TIs that will either Facebook me or email me, and they go, no, I know it's my neighbor. I'm going to go over there and straighten this crap out. And true, they may put people around you that are there to watch you, mainly so they know when you leave, when to break into your house and go rifle through your stuff. Typically, they don't steal anything. That's not the goal. They're there to sift through the information, find out what your strengths and weaknesses are, find out who your support system is, and mainly make sure that they scatter stuff around so you've been broken into. They don't want to do it sneakily. They want you to know. They want you to come home and go, oh, my God. I didn't leave these dishes on the table. I'm going to call the police. Well, after 3 or 4 calls to the police where your dishes have been moved or your clothes have been tampered with, but nothing's been stolen, eventually they're going to write you off as crazy, and these perpetrators know that. Because once you're written off as crazy by your local PD, when they finally do break in, if they do, and in person, to do something to you, well, you call the police. The dispatcher is going to look on the computer, and they're going to say, well, we've had 20 other calls there in the last year for nothing. She thinks her microwave is attacking her. We don't need to send it. And they know that. And the perpetrators know that. And that is why they do that. Same reason that they want you to believe that there's cameras and microphones in your home, because they know when you start tearing into your walls and your family comes over there and you've got half of your sheetrock out, looking for the cameras and the microphones that aren't going to be there because that's way low-end technology. It's something your boyfriend or girlfriend may do. It's not something that the FBI or the CIA is going to do.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I kind of
Okay.
lost it there for a second.
Yeah, sorry about that. So you were saying about how advanced the technology is.
Well, because then when the family sees that, then it'll be your family that actually recommends you to a psychiatrist. And right. the way a psychiatrist determines whether or not you're delusional or not, and chances are you're not going to get a schizophrenic diagnosis because most of us that are being targeted get targeted in our 40s, and well beyond the diagnostic years of schizophrenia. So typically what you see psychiatrists give you is delusional disorder. And the way they base a delusional disorder on you is when you tell them the story, is it plausible that this may be happening to you? Well, if you came into a psychiatrist's office and said, well, I spent 20 years in the CIA, was in this theater and that theater, and I feel like they're probably kind of watching me. Well, that's plausible. The psychiatrist is going to go, well, if you were in that kind of work, they probably are still watching you. You're okay. Well, if you're a housewife and you come in with that same complaint, the psychiatrist sees that as not plausible. Why would they be watching you? You're not radical. You've never lived abroad. You're not a threat to the government. You're not a threat to the political system. It's not plausible. So it's delusional. And that's pretty much, in a nutshell, how the diagnostics go.
Although I've heard recently, I read online, there was an article that they just changed the schizophrenic diagnosis to you can be in your 30s and 40s now and get it for the first time. And I think that's some kind of cover.
And they added the paranoid part to it. And if it's schizophrenia of a paranoid type thing, and you're right, it is a cover. It's to rope in all the numbers of people now that are coming forward, in later in life and voicing these complaints. And not necessarily the fault of your community psychiatrist, because they're mostly probably ignorant of even their own history of human rights abuses and within their specialty, but mainly because there's no other, if you bring mostly Google searches, and I have a lot of people have said, well, I even gave them a copy of your book. Well, trust me, that ain't going to help you much because they're just going to see the only person that's crazier than a TI is the doctor that believes them, really, is what they're going to look at it as. But as more and more comes out, and one of the things that we've been trying to do is actually try to figure out ways to actually slip in some education within the psychiatric realm, because I really do think that at the ground level, most of these psychiatrists, they're normal doctors that are there to put in a 9-to-5 day, put you on some antidepressants and rope you into some monthly cash visits. I don't think they're working on any of the research, and most of them probably aren't part of any of the research. But certainly at the top, at the American Psychiatric Association and the Canadian Psychiatric Association, they know damn well this is going on. And those are the people that actually write the DSM-4 and the DSM-5. And you're right, that is the reason that those things are added in. And it is because this technology was invented all along, to mimic psychiatric illness.
Yeah, and they can do that pretty successfully. So what is your advice then if people need to go to the doctor, say we're experiencing something, and all of us have done this. I quit going because I realize a lot of times it's psyops. They want to scare me to death, or not literally, of course, they want to scare me. And so I stopped going because they were like, oh, you have a hole in your head now. You better, you're going to die, and, all this stuff. So I run to the ER, and I get, a brain scan. They say there's nothing wrong with your brain, But they do all these games. So, but I didn't say anything, of course. So do you suggest the same thing? Just if you do have to go in, don't mention what you think it is, or maybe you can help, because I don't want anyone else to end up going to a psychiatric institution if they don't need to. And most of us don't. So maybe you can advise, the listeners as the best approach to dealing with the police, doctors, therapists, our family, just real quickly.
Yeah, you have to not mention it. And really that's why we have, organizations and podcasts and stuff where you can actually vent to other people who do know what you're going through and do believe you. I get a lot of emails where people say, well, I need a doctor in my area that is going to believe me, that knows about this. Well, there's not.
Right.
There just isn't. There's a handful of us that believe it, and even me in Texas, I've been pretty much stopped from seeing TIs in the office. The medical board here essentially said, I had so many complaints from people who read my books, and then called the board, some of them TIs actually, where the medical board said, if somebody comes in complaining of you of stalking or satellite, interference with their life, if you don't refer them to a psychiatrist, then we will come after you for malpractice. So, and that's why the people, if any of you have emailed or called the office trying to get in, that's why they're so protective of me in the office, because I really can't see TIs as patients. Not unless it's for a legitimate medical reason, another reason. But if they're trying to make an appointment strictly to talk to me about that, for one, I don't have the time, because I'm swamped with real medical patients, and typically, to sit down and explain this or talk to someone who's a victim, that's usually a 1 or 2 hour thing, not a 20-minute doctor appointment. But the other reason is because the board's pretty smart. Remember, the board was complicit in my targeting. So, and they don't like the fact that I've exposed who they also use the same PI group to watch doctors in the state of Texas. So, I'm definitely not on good terms with them. And one of the ways they figured out the best way to discredit me, well, if a TI comes in order to save my license and my ability to make a living, well, if they're telling me I have to refer that person to a psychiatrist, well, then I lose my credibility within the community. But if I go ahead and keep seeing people in the office for TI-related issues, well, then I lose my ability to make a living. So it really it was a brilliant move on their part, because it really put me in a catch-22. So that's why typically people that came here to see me, I usually see them as John Hall. I usually meet them in a hotel room to talk to them or scan or whatever, but not in the office.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's something, you might already have something in place. I don't know personally. Maybe we can, put some things in place for the receptionist so she can make some referrals, and maybe to some of the organizations we have, and, just something like that. Is that something that you can legally do or safe to do?
Yeah, and usually my receptionist usually gives them my email address or another way to get a hold of me so I can actually explain that to them. But like I said, this isn't going away, and it's not getting smaller. I mean, like I said, I easily, at a minimum, get 10 messages a day. And this is 10 new people each day. This isn't,
yeah,
this isn't the same people calling over and over, yeah. And
with that said, though, I'm sorry, John, I'm stepping on you. Go ahead.
Okay. And a lot of that came from, when I was working with Kofi Annan, and, he was interested in actually trying to get this in front of the UN Committee on Torture. I wrote a letter at their request, and it had all my office and personal information on it. So, and a certain person within the TI community decided to release that online for widespread use. So all of a sudden, pretty much all of my personal information was online. And that's typically, I think, how people started finding me, was through that.
Right. But with that said, you said there's so many more people coming out of the woodworks now, and people are starting to hear about it, know about it. That means it's going to be harder and harder to keep this secret. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and then that's exactly what kind of my long-term plan is. I know everybody, a lot of the forums that I'm on and that I see, everybody's looking for a way to shield it. Everybody's looking for countermeasures. When I think our ultimate goal is best going to be to expose this and educate the public, where we have a larger voice. Because even if you took every targeted individual in the U.S. right now, it's still a relatively small population of people as far as numbers go into forcing the government to do anything.
Yes.
We need to educate the non-targeted public, make this seem believable and palatable to them. And that's why it's got to be explained in a very certain way. We've got to take advantage of any forms of media that may get out to the uninformed public, because we're at a point now where it's so commonplace, I think, that if you took just about anybody and said, well, have you ever heard about this? People hearing voices and think they're being, targeted by the government. I would wager that just about everybody in this country will be able to say, yeah, I had a cousin that thought that, or I know a guy that had a friend that thought that, or I've seen that online, or I've read about that. it's getting that commonplace. Because I've even had people that are patients of mine. They're essentially non-targeted. That come in and they'll say, "Man, I heard you on Coast to Coast, and I've got a friend who thinks that. I need to set the two of you up, or I need to make sure he has a copy of your book because I got a friend who thinks that." I mean, it's gonna get to a point where there's gonna be somebody targeted in just about every family in America.
Yep, I think it's there. I really do think it's pretty much there, and I agree with you 100%. It's really about educating the public. I mean, I will do anything to bring this to light in the media, and so I'm calling everybody, contacting every journalist, every producer. I'm doing everything I can to kind of get this out because they have to know what this is before they do anything. We can't even get a congressional hearing, I believe, and have a successful one until people know what's really going on. That's my opinion. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, because you need a congressman on your behalf to actually call for a congressional hearing.
Right.
And Nick Begich and I had talked at length about that, especially when his brother was in Congress. He wasn't quite there yet where he could do it because he was a journeyman congressman and then wound up not getting reelected. But, we had talked, we're really ultimately going to need a lobbyist, somebody that's just lobbying on our part. Going from office to office saying, now we have 500,000 people. This can make or break someone's election now. And, we need a hearing on it, and they can be a political force. And that's what it's going to take. And I'll be honest with you, I know I had caught a lot of flack about guinea pigs. I got too political in it. Well, guess what? The answers to this are going to be political. It's not going to be you walking around in a shielded suit or putting Mylar all around your house. Those are the things that are just going to make you look crazy and continue to get you diagnosed as mentally ill. The solutions are going to be education, and the solutions are going to be political. And that's why I went on a political rant in that book, because I'll tell you, I'm libertarian. I'm not either party. I'm really just common sense. We need to love each other, and we need a normal society. But I've had far more luck talking to Republicans than I have Democrats. And you can ask any victim in California that has sent letters to Feinstein or Pelosi. Typically, you get a letter back saying to go find a psychiatrist from those two. But Representative Guest, the Republican senators that we have in Texas, several of the other Republican senators I talked to in New York, never had a problem actually talking to those people. I had an open door with them. But it seems like every Democratic Party legislator I've tried to get a hold of doesn't want to hear it. And I think that's evidenced in the fact that Democratic Party used to be the party for the people. The party of JFK is no more. They do seem to be the party that wants control more. And they have successfully blamed Bush and Cheney for just about everything. And I know a lot of TIs disagree with that. Well, Bush is the one who opened the Patriot Act and da-da-da-da-da. This technology existed long before the Patriot Act ever was a thought. So, I mean, it's, the answers are going to have to be political, as bitter as that tastes. And on the other hand, if you're deriving most of your living from the government, you're going to have to vote. The government really wants you to vote, and that's why I made that point in my book that, that a lot of that is government slavery. I mean, that's another form of control. So.
Yes. Okay, then I guess, I don't know if we should go to shielding, but I definitely wanted you to maybe give people an understanding, like what works in communicating, because I've been a target for 13 years, but I wasn't in the community for a long time, and I didn't know I was going through anything for like 7-8 years. I was just dealing with human experimentation, and so when I came into the community, I looked at you and I looked at Robert Duncan and the people that were believed. You do have a lot of extra initials on your name, and so you have the doctors and you have these different things. But I noticed you guys. You don't speak in very blanket statements. You don't you stay away from a lot of the emotional words. You try to remain calm and clear, and you don't go too much into your own targeting. So I kind of modeled the way I communicate, like to journalists and to people like that, the way that you do, the way that you communicate. And so maybe that's something you can tell the listeners what works when you speak to people.
Yeah, I mean, I try to stick to. I mean, don't make up things that you really can't prove. I know a lot of people will say, "Well, I know I've got chips all in my brain, and it's the CIA doing it, and the CIA's outside my house." Well, yeah, you're kind of right. Indirectly, the data is going back to the CIA and the NSA and the DoD and just about every other organization in the government that's using this technology. But the people that are outside your house, unless you're a whistleblower, are probably private investigators or lowlifes hired by a private investigator firm to actually surveil you and follow you around. So I mean, you really got to speak on what if you're telling people you're chipped, you better be able to produce proof that you're chipped. Because I have scanned people for 10 years now, and yeah, we found a few people that are chipped. Most we haven't. Well, then here in the last 5 years, it's nano. Well, if you're not finding everything, it's nano. Well, nano doesn't explain to people that have been going to do this for 20 years. It didn't exist then. So, it's at the beginning of their targeting. And if it was being done completely with nanotechnology, we would have a much larger group of people complaining of this than we do. Because if it was being done through aerial spraying of nanoparticles, then, we would have 1 million people complaining of this, not 200,000 or 300,000. Because it would be infecting us all. And that's one of the reasons that when people say they're chipped and they send me their MRIs, yeah, we have found some, but for the most part, I get MRIs that are circled by the victims, and most of what they're circling are normal findings. Just one quick explanation on reading a brain MRI especially. To get something into your brain is very difficult. It almost has to be a neurosurgical procedure. Really, the only two ways to get into the brain with a needle is through the nose or through the back of the eye. And either one are going to leave some damage and leave some bruising. And in the hands of someone that doesn't know what they're doing, like a street criminal that's breaking into your house to chip your brain, that's going to leave neurologic damage. You're not going to wake up and just be fine the next morning. You're going to have raccoon eyes from a giant harpoon going through the cribriform plate at the back of the nose into the brain. I guess technically you could go into the ear, but anything like that you can find. You can find those things on CT. You can find those things on MRI. But the main thing I want to press forward is the skull is not an empty void globe that the brain sits in. There's a lot of little bony contours and sinuses and smaller bones actually within the skull that the brain sits in. When an MRI takes an MRI of the brain, it does it in slices, either from top to bottom or bottom to top, and then a coronal slice that goes back to, from the face backwards and from the side to side. And as you look at each one of those slides, you're going to see different little white specks and blobs and runners, and, it's all the three-dimensional contents of the bones of the skull that actually hold the brain, including veins and arteries and capillaries. And a lot of times when you see a vein or an artery, in a cross-sectional view, it'll look like a black spot that just kind of appears out of nowhere on a slice, and then it disappears on the next slice. Well, that's how a vein or an artery looks when it's a cross-sectional view. So a lot of what I get sent, what people are circling on, are actually normal findings with an MRI. Metal of any type shows up like a Christmas tree in a CT or an MRI. So, it is unmistakable. There's no looking at it and going, I think this looks like something, because all of a sudden it popped up right here, but it's not on the other side by my other ear. Well, no one is symmetric either. No human being is symmetric. So when you look at an MRI, there are going to be little structures and bony elements that look a little different from side to side. So that's one thing you have to be real careful about, is self-diagnosing your MRIs and then going to the authorities, because they are going to have one of us that's a physician that's used to looking at those look at it. And they're going to go, no, this is a normal MRI. And it's not because the doctor's in on it or part of it or trying to make you look bad. It's because there's really nothing there. And after looking at thousands of targeted individuals, MRIs and CTs, my conclusion is, and I've stated this in my books, that I don't think all of it's being done with chipping. I think it's being done the way MK Ultra was done initially. I think there's multiple sub-projects. I think the people with Morgellons disease are probably the crowd that are being chipped, and certainly maybe getting experimented on with nanotechnology. I think there's a sub-project where they're just using broadcasting. Even Delgado, before he passed away, in an interview said that the era of chipping was dead, that everything he did with chipping could be done with broadcasting. That's what he called it, meaning radio frequency.
Frequencies, yeah. That's what I think a lot of this is.
So, I would focus on this as non-consensual experimentation. because you can always fall back on that. In the first couple of chapters of guinea pigs, that's all legitimate, verified. You can find it on Freedom of Information, versions of, through the years what the government has done experimentally on the public. There's no laws against it. That people say, well, what about the Nuremberg Code and what about the Helsinki Accord? Those are suggestions. They're not American laws. There is absolutely no legislation to protect the public from government experimentation. Mm-hmm. And that's really the route you have to go, because anybody that reads the first few chapters of guinea pigs, if they still think the government's never experimented on someone, without their consent, then they're a lost cause. They're not ever going to believe it. Just give up.
Yeah.
I
agree. So, yeah, it's interesting because Dave Voice is changing his campaign a little bit too, and focusing more on human experimentation, interestingly enough. So that seems to be what people believe, and that's what he got the feel of when he went halfway across America. That seemed to be the connecting point. So, and he still wants to use targeted individual because it's like a brand at this point. People are finally know what that word is, and so we're still using it. Some people don't like it, but we understand that that's the word that's getting around. And so in human experimentation. Well, that's really great advice. And I guess the most important topic, and I know it's kind of a very tough topic because we can't offer a lot, and I know even you as a doctor can't, is I wanted to get into shielding in health. And, that's another area you know a lot about, being a doctor. So anything you can offer, any suggestions on protecting people? Like, I guess maybe we can start with, shielding from directed energy weapons. That's one area that maybe you have some input on that you've seen some things that have been successful.
Well, I will tell you one thing: the government itself can't shield from it.
I know, I do know that. Yeah.
Yeah, because the Air Force and the Army both. The way the Air Force works with the private sector is they put out calls for white papers, and what white papers are, from those of us that do research, is where if you're doing some research, let's say on a way to shield elf waves, but you're a private university or you're a university that's not being funded by government grants, or you're a private company, then you submit a paper saying, well, right now we're working on this and we think we have found a way to shield radio frequency between, 5 and 10 hertz. Well, then what will happen is the Air Force or the DOD and will look at that. They'll come out, they'll see what you're doing, and if it's something that interests them, then they'll black budget you. Fund your research, and it all goes straight to the DOD, and it doesn't go into normal peer-reviewed circles. And just so you know, that the government, the DOD, Air Force and Navy, and Army specifically, have had calls for white papers out on shielding elf waves and shielding RF for some time now. The way they shield their drone operators is they put them in giant metal cargo bins, kind of like what you see on the back of a freight train hauling freight. Or another thing was like the giant metal trash bins, like they put construction material in. They put them in those with zero windows and zero airflow. And that's actually what they control drones from, so no one can actually impermeate and work with any of the electronics that they're using to control drones. So even the government's having a hard time finding shielding. The reason I haven't focused a lot on shielding in my writing is because, one, you can kind of shield it with Mylar. You can kind of shield some of the different weapons with enmeshed coppered wire. Microwave, actually, saline packs water that's actually the same salinity of seawater, even maybe slightly stronger, will actually shield some of the microwave energy, because they did test where they found out that it's hard to microwave something in the ocean, because satellite-based microwave weapons, when they hit the ocean, they actually skip. They skip along the surface because of the sodium molecules. They don't permeate it. So if you think you're being microwaved, actually, if you have access to like medical bags of normal saline that we use for IVs, that will shield it somewhat if you put it in an area where they're attacking. Now, you'll have to constantly move it because they're going to constantly move where they're attacking.
So when we're soaking in those Epsom salt baths, those Epsom salt baths mean something.
Same thing, yeah.
Okay.
Now, as far as like shielding from the directed energy or from the voice to skull, that's a little tougher, because a lot of that is modulated elf waves and scalar waves, and those penetrate just about everything, and even the government can't figure out how to protect themselves from those weapons. So now, if if you could formulate some suit that actually is at spec levels to block everything down to 1 hertz, then you might have some success, but then you're going to be walking around in a suit to block the radio waves, which is going to land you in a psychiatrist's office and ultimately land you probably in a hospital for a while. And then you'll be let go and you won't be able to wear your suit because you'll be hospitalized again when you get seen wearing it. So the reason, and that's the reason I don't go into that, because the ability to shield most of this is well beyond the financial means of most TIs, especially since I know the government can't shield it. And what shielding does work, you can use in the privacy of your home, but if you're at work with, your copper mesh and your Mylar and you're setting it around your cubicle so you can work on the computer, then you're probably not going to be there long. And honestly, that's why I've really been focusing more of my attention on public education, educating the psychiatric community, getting this out into forms of media that are attractive to non-targeted population. Like I said, I know I've seen some of the complaints about guinea pigs on Amazon where, he didn't get into more of the targeting and more of the solutions for targeting. And that's because everything I do is geared at roping in that non-targeted population to go, man, these people really are suffering. This must be real.
Right. So you don't really feel that even magnets are that beneficial? They probably have maybe some effect. Because I know a lot of people.
If you can create a magnetic field around yourself, certainly that is going to interrupt some weaponry that they use.
Okay.
But microwaving, about the only thing you can do is try to cool down the areas where they're hitting. Unless they're using a wide beam aperture, on you, and that's where the people that will tell you they feel like their whole body is being heated, because it is.
Right.
And if you take your temperature, you will find that your whole body is being heated. Now, if they're just targeting your genitals or just targeting your eyes or just targeting your face or they're just targeting the occipital nerves, the most common attack is actually to attack the occipital nerves behind the head. They lay very superficial to the skin. They're easy to attack with just about any modality of directed energy. And as soon as you stimulate the occipital nerves, you get an instant-on migraine down one side of your head. And the minute they turn off the stimulation, it goes away. And the way you know they're doing that is the fascia in the back of the neck is so fragile and so responsive to thermal energy that as that fascia heats up, you can actually hear it crickle and crack and pop, and it kind of feels and sounds like Rice Krispies crickling and cracking in milk, and you can feel it and hear it in the back of your head as they heat those nerves up.
Oh, so that's what that is.
It's thermal. It's fascial tissue around those occipital nerves that are actually being heated up, and it's shrinking and expanding, and shrinking and expanding. And you can feel it and you can hear it. And then usually not long after that, you're going to get a massive headache. If they're attacking both nerves, there's one on either side of the occiput. And if you put your thumb at the back of your neck and run your hand along the side of your head with your pinky towards the corner of your eye, that's the distribution of the occipital nerve. There's 2 of them in the back of the neck, and they're easily manipulated to give you headaches.
So if you do get one of these headaches, what do you suggest? Is medication kind of null and void at this point, or?
Yeah, it's not going to go away till they turn it off, or you can block it, and then that's when you want to use your cold saline packs. It's typically microwave energy that they use back there to stimulate those nerves, and usually a cold pack, especially if it's saline water, will usually kind of obviate it.
Okay. And then, so I know you, when I first reached out to you, you had suggested some, vitamins. So I do know that you recommend vitamins. Maybe you can tell everybody what it is that you suggest.
Well, and I'll tell you, the other thing you really need to do, most of this is tracking by the EEG. The other thing is binaural beats, and that is the way that most of us have escaped, is using binaural beat programs at night through earphones, resynchronizing both hemispheres of the brain. The tracking is done by your brain. If they can't track you, they can't attack you with the rest of the weapon system. So, if you can, and the way you break entrainment is by 2 ways. Binaural beats used through earphones at night while your brain waves are in a slower rhythm, and that will resynchronize both hemispheres without an interference wave being transmitted by your brain. They can't find you. That's what actually puts you on the map. The other thing, extremely high doses of electromagnetic energy around the clock, which is what most of us experience. It releases a lot of free radicals in the body. Free radicals are known for premature aging, for cataract formation. Some people say that it can cause cancer in the long run because it actually interferes with certain oncogenes that actually are restrictive oncogenes that actually stop cancer from forming. And this didn't actually come from me. This wasn't from my research. This was from research from Brook City Base. These were people who were volunteering to be hit with directed energy 24/7. And what Brook City Base put these people on was a cocktail that was a combination of high-dose vitamin D3, at least 1,000 IUs a day, alpha-lipoic acid, 600 milligrams twice a day, and sublingual glutathione at 50 milligrams under the tongue a day. And the combination of those three are such powerful free radical scavengers that they will help the body repair when it's being exposed to high doses of electromagnetic energy.
Well, that's great news. I've read a lot of research on studies on vitamin C, and it can practically cure beginning stages of cancer, supposedly.
Yeah, I mean, it can. The problem with high doses of vitamin C is it all gets strained to your kidneys, too. So,
right.
There can be some kidney issues and stuff with it.
Something to consider. Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. The binaural beats, and anybody that's targeted really has to be on free radical scavengers, because just about everybody listening probably has figured out that their vision's getting blurrier, getting worse as they get targeted. Their hearing is getting worse as they get targeted. That they're aging at the speed of light, and that's from free radicals. They found out a long time ago that extremely high doses of electromagnetic energy actually inhibit a cellular enzyme called ornithine decarboxylase. And the entire function of ornithine decarboxylase is to basically allow cells to phagocytize and swallow up these free radicals. Well, if it's inhibited, then your body's not gobbling up these free radicals the way they will. So the best option you have is to get on a free radical scavenger. So. Okay.
And then also the waves somehow interfere with the melatonin production or natural melatonin production. So do you suggest melatonin?
Yeah, if you're having trouble sleeping, and typically they do want to make you keep you up all night, because that's what they want, is you looking like hell, creases on you, dark circles around your eyes, sleep deprived, because that completes the crazy look. And regardless of all these commercials, you see Glenn Close, with her shirt on saying, I'm bipolar and I'm proud. Unfortunately, that's not the way society looks at the mentally ill. It never will be the way society looks at the mentally ill. LA and Hollywood has tried to give it a friendlier hand. But once you're diagnosed, the diagnosis itself a lot of times finishes your downward spiral, because your family never sees you the same. Your coworkers never see you the same. They're sleep depriving you for a reason, because when you get up, you've gone to bed at 4 a.m. and you get up at 6 a.m. and you do that for 3 or 4 weeks or 3 or 4 months, and you're not showering, your hair is all disheveled, there's dark circles under your eyes. That's two things. That's on drugs or mentally ill, and either one of them will do. They want people to perceive you as either one or both, because it automatically discredits you from getting any legitimate help if you ever do figure out who's really doing it to you. Melatonin is a good, safe way to get sleep. I try to discourage people from using Xanax or Ambien or any of those drugs, because they're going to impair you, and especially women living alone, which are a lot of the victims. If somebody breaks in and rapes you, and then they find out that, you take a milligram or 2 of Xanax every night to go to sleep, they're going to blame it on that. If you weren't drugging yourself, you wouldn't be getting raped, or that you weren't raped at all and that you've made it all up. So
right.
I try to discourage people from using the prescription drugs like that to sleep, because it's gonna further victimize you in the long run. Melatonin is a good safe one. It won't block your memory, and it's a little bit lighter. It may not work perfectly, and it certainly won't slam you down the way an Ambien or a Xanax is going to. But at least it won't be held against you if you ever have to defend yourself.
What about people? A lot of us, we have bouts of depression and negativity, and plus we're dealing with frequencies that can create this within us. And so, what do you suggest for these, for depression and similar symptoms?
You know what? If you have a psychiatrist that you trust, and you wanted to try low dose antidepressants, I guess maybe that's not. If it's depression that's severe to the point where you're thinking suicide, or thinking killing somebody else and then suicide, then certainly at that point it's probably worth a try to use an antidepressant. For the most part, I don't recommend those either, just for typical reactive depression, which is every now and again you're depressed because you're targeted or because someone's passed away, or reactive forms of depression, because I think those drugs have side effects that are pretty bad, and that can actually potentiate you committing suicide rather than prevent it. But I think there is a proper time that they need to be used.
Right.
Otherwise, the best way I found to fight depression is get online, talk to other people, just do things. The worst thing you can do to yourself as a target is sit at home and be a guinea pig. Sit at that computer all day long, Googling electronic harassment to see if something new has come up, or if somebody else has found something, or, constantly find yourself roped into sharing bad knowledge from somebody else that's sharing bad knowledge. That's what they want. And what most targets that have successfully broken away have found, that you use a combination of binaural beats, you use a combination of free radical scavengers, you force yourself to keep going out, to a job, or going out to socialize with people. And I mean true socializing. I don't mean going out talking to everybody about your problems with the CIA and how you're being targeted. I mean, go to a football game, go to a bar, go to a club, go to a movie. Actually do something that will allow you to block it out. Because once they see that they're not going to keep you locked in your home as a guinea pig, that you're going to live despite them trying to keep you at home as a guinea pig, they finally give up, believe it or not. What I found with a lot of these targets, once they start living again, you actually start, screw this, I'm not going to lay in this bed and complain that I hurt all day from being attacked. I'm going to force myself to work, even if it's part-time, or I'm going to force myself to go to the park and walk my dog, or, just do something that is the way you break away from it. What keeps you a victim is the entrainment. Right. And if you're gonna sit at the computer or lay on the couch all day talking back and forth with them, you will never escape, because they do that for a reason. They talk to you all day and all night for a reason. It keeps you entrained. It keeps you on the map geospatially, so they can attack you with the weapons. And the minute you decide, I'm going to ignore you, I'm not going to talk back, I'm not going to think my answers back, I'm going to live my life, they'll try like hell to keep you roped in, and the attacks are going to get worse at that point for a little while. And then they're going to give up, and they're going to use the manpower on the next victim.
And so what would you say to the people who have the heavy gang stalking? How would you tell them, how would you explain to them, or what advice would you give them about, changing their mindset? Because some of them just refuse. They're like, I'm going to go to the store, and then they're going to follow me, they're going to do this. And I know it happens to me too, not as often as it did in the beginning, but I just ignore them now at this point, as long as they're not so aggressive in my face around my children. But I'm okay when I go out now. I just wish there was something I could say to the listeners that would make them feel okay about it, because you do have to deal with nonsense. But I want them to feel, maybe you can give them some kind of tool, because I just want people to go out and be okay and feel okay.
Well, I have a little skewed view on that because of where I live. In Texas, you don't go around actually stalking people much anymore.
Right.
Because it'll get you killed real quick. So on that aspect, I did have gang stalking a lot, and then my gang stalking became the FBI. Later on, after both books published, the FBI hates me. That's why just a real quick aside, when I see these victims saying, I'm going to call the FBI, they're going to get out here, and I talked to a guy and he's going to help me, the FBI knows full well what's going on. They're part of it. I wrote that in the second book. There was a girl I went to dinner with 3 times and got called in by the FBI. They threw a copy of my book down in front of her. They said, you don't believe what Hall writes about our satellite technology, do you? She said, you know what, I've been to dinner with him 3 times. I really don't know him that well, but he gets 1,000 emails a day from people voicing just this complaint. Why don't you talk to him? And they said, well, how does he know enough to write about it? An interesting question they asked her, and I mentioned some of this in the book, but not all of it. The interesting question that they asked her is, does Dr. Hall own any counter surveillance equipment? They didn't ask if I own surveillance equipment. They asked if I own counter surveillance equipment or scanning equipment.
Interesting.
So she said, I don't really know him that well. I've never been to his house. I've always met him for dinner. The closing comment by this FBI agent, his name is Jeff Allovio. That's the real name, Allovio. People check him out. He's an FBI agent in San Antonio. He said, well, picked up the book, and when she said you should talk to John Hall, he said, well, Dr. Hall is not under official investigation, but he's a piece of shit, and you're better off not dating him. So, that's my tax dollars and your tax dollars at work with the people that you should be able to turn to help you. They know you're being targeted. They know it's non-consensual experimentation. They don't care. So, and they made that completely evident. So, and to this date, that was 4 or 5 years ago. To this date, they've never called me in to interview me, not once.
Right.
They've sat vans out in front of my house, clearly demarcated automated FBI surveillance van, so my neighbors see that my house is under surveillance by the FBI. They've sicked members of my homeowners association on me for, my dog barking or my grass not being mowed, things like that. But no, the FBI has never actually called me in to talk to me. And then actually, just to make sure that girl didn't date me, actually emailed her satellite photos of me out on other dates to her.
Oh my God!
Yeah, so
that's quite remarkable.
Yeah.
That's where your money's going, and not money on a national level. Wow.
And every one of these photos was from an approximate, probably almost 90-degree angle. They weren't taken from a camera in a car; they were taken from the sky. So
that's interesting. So what do you think? Because I just hear so many people that are so scared to go outside and don't want to deal with it.
Go anyway.
Go
and do what you got to do. If they walk up behind you in a public place and they start using street theater on you, whip out your phone, turn around, take a picture of them. Perfectly legal to take a picture of someone in a public place. That's called res ipsa loquitur. That stands for rat in a bottle. That's Latin for rat in a bottle. And when you're in a public place, you understand that the risk of you having your picture taken may be in a film. We find that out in the film industry, that we don't have to get a consent from you if we're shooting a commercial in front of a store and you happen to be on a public street or in a public parking lot walking into the store. We don't have to get your consent to have you in it because it's implied consent that once you leave your domicile, you realize that you're in public and your picture may be taken. And the perps know that too. That's why they sit on the street. They can sit on the curb in the street directly in front of your house all night long, and the police can walk up and harass them, but they actually can't make them leave unless they're on your property. And
but you can go up to them. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, the perpetrators know that damn well. Oh, yeah, you can walk up and ask them to leave, and even then they still don't have to.
But you can go up and give them an information flyer too, right?
Yeah. Or take a picture. I think
sometimes they don't know. Yeah, take a picture and then give them maybe an information flyer and teach them about, because I think some people don't really know, and some of them are just low-level, criminals doing what they do or just can't get a job, and so this is what they're doing now. So sometimes just educating them. I love that idea. I know of a TI, she goes, 2 of them actually, a man named Greg and another TI, they just go up and hand them flyers, and kind of educate them what's going on. So I like that idea and that tactic as well.
Well, in the stalking you can work with, the police will work with you on stalking if you can prove it. Texas used to have the worst stalking laws. But my case and another case that resulted in murder actually is what got our stalking laws changed, where if you notice the same person following you more than twice, you don't have to show harm or that they physically assaulted you anymore to get a restraining order. You just have to notice they're following you more than twice. So, or following you online, or stalking you online. So it's still hard to prove, and even the lawyers here will say that is one of the hardest laws that make stick, but it's there. And if you look at the stalking laws in your state, you may find that there's something there that you can work with. Now, as long as you don't say these two guys are following me everywhere they go, and he's attacking me with microwaves from his cell phone, because then it's not going to fly. It's not going to fly.
So keep it simple. Don't need to know. Yeah. Give them what they need to know in order to do what they need to do to make sure the laws are being followed. So keep it just simple.
And you got to remember that in most cities with a big PD, not every police officer is part of it. Yes, in San Antonio, I did have 2 or 3 police officers that were under the hire of the PI group. So, yeah, there were a couple of corrupt police officers that were involved. In a small town, you may be fighting an entire force of corrupt police officers. But in a major metropolitan city, for the most part, the police are really pretty ignorant about this, except that, every night at 3 a.m., they get calls by somebody who's complaining that there's satellite-directed energy coming into their house. And you really have to look at it from their end of it. For the most part, these guys are high school, maybe associate's degree educated people. They go to work, they put in their time, they go home, they try to be with their family a little bit. They're not online looking at targeted individuals and electronic harassment. They haven't heard about this technology for the most part. I really don't think that every PD in every city is majorly influenced or knows all about it and is part of it. I think there are some officers that are. But if you get some of the ones that aren't involved, which are the majority of them, and you talk sensibly about somebody stalking you, I think you'll get results. As long as you don't mention the rest of it. Like I said, as long as you don't say, they're outside my house every day, they're outside my work every day, they're following me to the grocery store, they're saying things to let me know they're watching me, and they're attacking me with satellite-based directed energy. That's the part you leave out. Because if you can get the police to focus on the stalking, that may be all you need to back them off of you completely so they don't risk losing their whole organization.
That's really good advice. On that note, I know you have to go soon. Do you have time for a question or two, or should we just continue talking?
Sure, I can take a couple.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to take the first person at this point who has their hand up. Let's see. Okay, here's, I think, very difficult to see here. 1 second here. Quite a few callers. It's going to take me a second to find number 1. Go down. Okay, Missouri. Here we go. Southeast Missouri, you're on the line.
This is Dave Case. I was wanting to give you some information. I tried to patent a light-operated computer and was attacked with very high technology. And to make a long story short, I've invented a countermeasure that sounds similar to the tinnitus, and it is knocking out what's called a biorelevant feedback loop that they use to target individuals. And so far I've cured 30 people, and if you know of anybody that would need a copy of this sound mix, give it out free. And so far it's really been a success story, and I've turned my life around and stopped the attacks on my person, and 30 other people have reported being helped by this sound mix. And it's similar to the bio-neural beats that you were just talking about with headphones.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Anything that can interrupt the entrainment will ultimately interrupt them being able to do anything else to you. So you're definitely on the right track with that. I mean, we started with binaural beats, and that it sounds like that's essentially kind of you're doing something similar, which is just resynchronizing the hemispheres of the brain where they're not producing an interference frequency anymore. So, and there'd be a ton of people interested in that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and in our community, Dr. Hall, he's been giving them for free. He's just very altruistic in this approach. He's, offers it to us and he sends it to us. And I did it last night, Dave, and I slept the best I've ever slept, and I woke up with energy. I couldn't believe it. It's just my first night. I couldn't believe it. I'm just a coincidence. I don't know. I got to try, consistently. But I was very, very surprised, And I started listening to binaural beats like months ago, but then I got off track and got into other things. We go in these little rabbit holes of shielding and ideas. So I was so happy. I really, really. I mean, maybe we can send Dr. Hall an email and give him a little information, because I know a lot of targets reach out to him. And I'm telling you, Dr. Hall, I tried it last night and I got a decent night's sleep. It was amazing.
Yeah, well, it's blocking the entrainment, and anything that'll do that is going to be what will save you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's actually way better than just random binaural beats. From my research, I'm an electronic engineer and inventor, and from my research, I believe they're using the GPS satellite system, bombarding us from 16 different directions, and constructive interference, which is scalar, and causing high fluctuations of energy in areas of the body. And what my sound mix does is contaminate the data they're getting back from the target. In other words, the brain waves, the body temperature, the heart rate, all this metadata has to be put into their computer to keep targeting the individual. And what mine does is the sound is contaminating the biorelevant feedback loop, and the whole thing starts to break down.
Yeah, and that's exactly the way it works. And what I worked with a long time ago in doing the same thing, which was blocking the feedback of data back to them, which I would tell the targets that I worked with. I said, this isn't going to necessarily, lessen your attack immediately, but what it's going to do is distort the amount of data they get out of you back into the system. And we were using Schumann resonance generators next to TVs and radios that were basically modulating, TV sounds or radio sounds or any type of ambient noise back on a Schumann resonance back into their system to actually, essentially, like you said, add interference to the system in general.
Right.
Well, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay, well, thank you, Dave. And, maybe you can get John an email and just to kind of keep him, kind of remind him what it is that you do. And, I mean, John has a lot of...
that way I can actually let some people actually share with that, too, so...
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the moderators, maybe there's like 20 people in the community I've talked to, and they started saying all these wonderful things about it, and I was too tired at night, and I just wasn't doing it. And it's not Mozart. Let me tell you, it's not Mozart. So
yeah.
But, I found out a little trick. What I did, John and Dave, as you know, I told you this before, Dave, I put in it's a specific, he asked you to get some very specific headset. It's kind of an old-fashioned one that goes over your head, and because it has to have, what was it? Why does it have to be that specific headset so it gets the range?
There's sounds on the CD. Pulse code modulation is what they're using to target people, and that's what's on my CD. And it has to go to 25 kilohertz, which is above your hearing. I find that they're using ultrasonics. When the energy fields hit the skin, they're using the skin as a transducer, and that's why you hear sounds, and that's pretty much how it operates.
Well, thank you so much, Dave.
It would be interesting to use your system through a neurophone with someone to see if it even works that much better.
Yeah, a 14-year-old kid invented a neurophone in 1959. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Sorry if you guys hear my bulldog breathing. She's a little loud. So, anyways, well, Dave, thank you so much. I'm glad you got a chance to talk to Dr. Hall because, he can recommend it to people. And, wow, I feel so good. Just after one night, I just can't believe how much better I feel. And I hope it's been...
Yeah, 30 people so far have gotten really good results. And also it's stopping the Gangstalking. What I find, that when you desynchronize your brain to their systems, they lose real-time abilities and adjustments, and they're not able to complete the street theater because they're out of time. And a lot of people are reporting, that the gangstalking is disappearing when they use a CD all night, every night.
Huh. Well, that'd be a good thing, too. That's for sure. Well, Dave, thank you so much. And I'm going to go ahead and put you back on hold. I'm going to go to the next person. Thank you, Dave.
Bye-bye.
Are you still there, John?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought maybe I lost you. Okay, Vermont. I'm going to go a little bit out of order just because it's difficult to find everybody. Hi, California. You're on the air.
Hi, Dr. Hall.
Hi, how are you?
Good. My name's Christy, and I've been listening to you, and there was one thing you said, that there was a difference between whistleblowers and just regular targeted, and I am a whistleblower, and I was just wondering what the difference with that is.
Oh, I'll tell you. I've worked with a number of whistleblowers, and normal targeting. It's bad that we're even referring to it as normal targeting, but targeting of individuals that are not whistleblowers. Typically, what I see, and I've actually evaluated this in several other states other than Texas, is usually done by a PI group, and it can be hired done to you. It's experimental at the very top, but at the local level, if you have an ex-boyfriend or an ex-husband and they're trying to make you look crazy so they don't have to pay child support or they can get possession of the kids or possession of the trust fund, this can be hired. You can go to these PI groups that have access to the technology, and you can hire it done to someone. And it's usually going to be street thugs that are hired off of the street that are there to follow you and break into your house, while one of the upper hierarchy folks within the PI group is actually the one sitting behind the computer that's making you hear voices and attacking them. Now, in the case of a whistleblower, it usually is agency-specific personnel that are doing it. They typically don't farm that out to the same PI group that is harassing all the rest of the housewives in Sacramento or the guys in Palm Beach. They usually keep it in-house, and it's usually quite a bit more severe. I mean, it's, people standing on your patio, staring you down from your patio windows, and they don't care if you call the police or not, because when the police get there, they're going to say, yeah, we're with the NSA, and this person is a whistleblower, and, we're making sure they don't divulge any state secrets. And the police are absolutely helpless in helping those people because, the people that are stalking them have the appropriate credentials to stalk them. And it is difficult to work with because those people are usually harassed and tortured even worse so than those of us that are just general members of the experimental guinea pig community than someone, say, that, like a Karen Stewart or someone who actually kind of went up against the authority of the NSA. That it's real difficult to work with them because the people that are following them around also work for the NSA or also work for the CIA or the Geospatial Agency. And I've worked with whistleblowers from just about every one of those agencies. And those are some of the most difficult cases because essentially the people doing that stalking are allowed to do it.
I see. And is there anything you can recommend?
In California? Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Get the heck out of that state because I think eventually we're just going to have to secede the battle to the perpetrators in California because it seems to be so well ingrained there and so allowed by the state politics there that it's difficult to fight. I mean, and it has gotten to a point in California where a lot of my victims that get a hold of me from there describe what they're going through. Believe it or not, there is a occult satanic part of it in California. There's a real strong political influence and DOD influence there. A lot of the research is being done there. And that's why there's no mystery that I would say probably the majority of the victims coming forward now are coming out of California in droves. And it seems to be more vicious. The stalking seems to be a lot worse there. The authorities seem to be less willing to actually do anything, despite some of the successes we've had recently, like in Richmond, California, where, they did agree to kind of go through an algorithm if they come across somebody who's voicing complaints of targeting, that they, instead of 5150, they'll actually refer them to, one of our, humanitarian groups for help. But all in all, the methodology behind the perpetrating there seems to be more vicious than most other states. And I've talked to some victims that it's so bad for them, and I said, you know what, give them what they want and move. If it's your homeowners association that's hired it done to you because they want you out of a certain housing area, leave. Just let them win and leave. Because
is that what they want?
Yeah, that depends. But in some instances, yeah. In some instances it is, it's a property thing, or it's a trust fund thing, or it's, especially in California, property is expensive there now. Not that it's worth it, but I mean, it's, like in, a house that you can build for $250,000 on 10 acres of land here would be, $3 or $4 million in California. So because of land prices, yeah, they will drive you off your property just for that reason alone. Because once they perpetrate you and they dog you and they torture you and you lose your job, you lose your house, and then usually your house gets foreclosed on and somebody can pick it up for 1/3 of what it's worth. So,
right.
I mean, yeah, that's a real common thing in California.
Oh, my God. Okay. And what are the lasting effects of all of this torture?
Well, that's what they don't know yet, and that's why most people are being tortured. I think you are that experiment. As I think they are trying to see what, 10 or 20 years or a couple of decades of extremely high electromagnetic energy exposure is going to do to people. So they know what cancers it's going to cause or what psychiatric problems it's going to cause before they open up and use it literally on the entire population. I think we are those guinea pigs to find out exactly what you asked.
I see. Thank you very much for answering my questions.
Sure.
Thank you, California. I'll go ahead and mute you back up. Okay, Vermont, sorry I missed you the first time. Let me go back to you. Couldn't find you on the board. There you are.
Oh.
Hi, Vermont. Hi, you're on the air.
Oh, thank you, Ella. Dr. Hall, I'm sorry, you mentioned for the free radical scavengers, there was where did the data come from? You mentioned
that came from Brook City Base. And if you look up Brook City Base, you'll see that was the Joint Directed Energies Research Lab. It's not now. They're not doing that anymore. They actually closed it down, but I actually had access to that lab for a while. So I was able to actually, get some of the things from them. That's where they did a lot of the directed energy work on lambs and sheep and primates, and then eventually we're actually doing it on humans. And I actually am friends with several of the researchers that work there on microwave energy weapons and on extremely low frequency wave weapons. So what I did was just, talk to people and peruse their library to see what they were protecting the voluntary, the consensual research with. And what they were doing was the people that were being subjected to high doses of microwave energy or any form of directed energy, they put them on that particular cocktail of free radical scavengers, because they had elucidated long ago from animal studies that the body basically responds to a continuous electromagnetic energy with free radicals because of it blocking the particular cellular enzyme that I mentioned.
And did they differentiate between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation?
There, they were only working with non-ionizing radiation. Ionizing radiation, you can figure that out pretty well with the same little radiation detectors that we use when we work in, I do almost all my work, with fluoroscopy and with X-ray. So, I have a little badge that I have to wear that it's a dosimetry. badge that shows how much radiation I'm being exposed to. And that's pretty easy to find. I don't think many people are actually being dosed with ionizing radiation because we're just not seeing we're not seeing the number of TIs dying of cancer that you would see early if they were being dosed with ionizing radiation. So,
thank you so much.
And that was very informative. Thank you, because it was you made it very clear about the different types of radiation. I appreciate it. I'm sure everybody else did too. We'll go back up here.
And Ellie, I better get going. As you know, I'm traveling.
I know. I was going to say I want to be mindful of your time, so a couple of quick closing things here. So I know that you had also said some of the solutions. I like to end on hope and solutions. That we need laws that make human experimentation explicitly illegal. And then you said that we need to elect leaders based on their ethical and moral character, and that we must have intelligence agencies that have oversight. I know that was something that's on your book, and I thought that was great. Anything else you want to say before you leave?
No, that's pretty much it. I mean, what we got to focus on is educating the non-targeted population, because we're going to need their voices to be able to get through to the government. Our numbers are too small, even though we have vast numbers. I mean, not saying that we don't, but 200,000 or 300,000 people is not big enough to get the government's attention. When everyone kind of finally believes this and realizes that it exists, that's when we'll start getting to see the government budge on some of the things. And it's not going to happen with establishment politicians. We need term limits, and we need to start getting people in there that are us, that aren't, family members that have been in politics forever. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big Trump fan, but Julian Assange has targeted Hillary for a reason. He himself said that 4 more years of her is going to be 4 more years of a surveillance state that we will not be able to escape. So, I mean, we live in a different time. And I know a lot of us are playing broken records as far as the Democratic Party used to be the party that it is no longer. I don't like Trump, but we got to have an outsider to break the ice to be able to get term limits and anything else. And hell, I've even jokingly told people, like 2020, no matter who we have, things will probably be so messed up that I may run in 2020.
And maybe you should. Maybe you should. So. Well, again, I just want to say thank you so much, and you taught me persistence pays off, so I really appreciate it.
It really does, and don't try to force it down people. When you're educating people, give them little tidbits that they can digest that sounds reasonable, and by all means, do not blame it on alien technology. So,
even if you believe it, don't mention it.
Even if you believe
baby
it, don't.
Spoon.
Yeah, because I've actually had some TIs call me and ask me, well, you didn't mention that this possibly is coming from the reptilians and the Greys. And I said, you know what, I can't go in front of a congressman and go, well, and there is the thought that some of this may be from the reptilians. I just can't. I will ruin any contact and availability I have to talk to those people. So
right.
Sticks to technology and small tidbits that are easily digestible. If you have to, read the first few chapters of Guinea Pigs and go, the government's always experimenting on people. And most people are going to go, yeah, I think you're probably right. And then kind of just wedge in a little bit,
Yeah. All right, so we have to educate the public, first things first.
And we're going to start doing that tomorrow, and I'll keep in contact with you about that. That's kind of leaving that kind of for a surprise. So.
Sounds good. Well, again, Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Safe travels, and we'll speak soon. And, we'll touch base about the Sean thing, too. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, well, that's where I'm going tomorrow. So, all right.
Oh, tell him I said hi.
All right. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Okay, bye-bye. Okay, guys, let me start to unmute. Okay. Go ahead. Well, I guess I'll just unmute everybody. Have a little patience with me, guys. There's a lot here. There's a lot of people here. Put their hands up. Sorry he couldn't stay longer, but he's heading down. So I guess what I should do, so many people. I'm just going to mute little by little here. So.
Okay. Bella?
Yes.
Hi, you just unmuted me. This is Roseanne.
Hi, Roseanne. I'm sorry I didn't get to you. He had such a limited amount of time, so I apologize.
That's okay, but it sounds like you're going to continue to have contact with him. Is that correct?
Yes. There's a person I introduced him to that is, there's going to be some contact, yes.
Okay, keep this in mind because a couple of us are really working on it and trying to figure it out. You probably saw that Magnus Olson published some photos of his blood recently.
Yes.
And his blood was all clumped, his blood cells were all clumped together. We are looking for medical implications of this technology. We're looking for medical evidence. So that was going to be my question to John, since he's a doctor. And it doesn't have to be the kind of evidence that only electromagnetic weaponry can cause. But, the whole idea is that if all these TIs have the same medical evidence in their body, like, clumping blood or, other markers, that it's just going to strengthen our case. So
right.
if you could just remember that and, a quick question to him, that would be great. It's just part of the process of trying to get evidence. Okay?
Okay, will do, Roseanne.
Thanks so much.
I muted several people.
Hi, Carla from Bakersfield, California.
Hi, Carla. How are you?
Good. Hi, Ella. I have my son here, and he was just he was actually he's a new targeted individual. They have just begun harassing him severely. And I had him listening in on the call, so thank you very much. I really appreciate that. He's new to all of this technology. Unfortunately, I've been going through this since 1994, and I recently lost my daughter because of this. She was actually murdered, and so my son and I are dealing with a lot of issues in California. He is right. If you live in California, they are relentless here. We actually have very, very violent stalking going on right now. I get sprayed with chemicals. I've had my hair set on fire. It's bad. I mean, they cut my hair, they set my hair on fire, they put head lice in my hair, they spray me with chemicals. They do things. And they poison me, they drug me, and they've been doing this to my son as well. And he actually woke up in the morning one morning, and he had needle marks all over him, and he had the voice of skull, and he was being told that he was injected with the HIV virus. And
did you get him tested though? But sometimes it's just psyops.
We've had the HIV testing done. However, they're telling us we have to test for the next 5 years. Apparently, one of his girlfriends made contact with him after they separated, and she called him. And of course, after he got the voice of skull, she calls him and says, "I have HIV." And so they're really messing with my son. They made him believe that he was drinking blood. They've just done so many horrible things to my son. But what I'm concerned is how can we shield from the helicopters and the planes hovering over us and hitting us? We have literally planes hitting us and helicopters using handheld weapons.
What kind of symptoms do you get when they do it?
Now this is going to be my fourth heart surgery that I've had. My doctor says I suffered 2 minor heart attacks, and he's going to do a radioactive nuclear test on my heart where they run the they run you an IV for 2 hours, and they take pictures of your heart. So I'm actually scheduled to have a heart surgery on the 29th again. This will be my fourth one. And they did an ablation on my afibrillator. The symptoms that I'm having is congestive heart failure and heart attacks. Okay, I'm having actual heart attacks. My doctor says I suffered 2 minor heart attacks.
Do you know when they happened, and did you feel chest pain or pain down one of your arms?
Yes, I actually fell to the floor, and the paramedics came, and I was not diagnosed correctly. Of course, I'm sure the paramedics told them I was crazy because they were in on it. But I did not get a correct diagnosis, but I do have a very good heart doctor, a heart specialist that I do get care from, and he's legit. And I actually have an implant in my chest that monitors my heart rate and any problems that may arise because of my congestive heart failure. This is called a loop recorder. And it's about 2 inches under the skin, and I have a machine that sits next to me, and it transmits back to the doctor. So my heart recorder actually produced a state of an emergency, and looking at he had me take blood labs and everything else, and he says that he thinks that I suffered 2 minor heart attacks because of these attacks from airplanes and helicopters. Now, I don't know what the airplanes are doing, but I did see a beam coming from the helicopter, and he was very, very low.
Oh, excuse me, guys. I didn't get to the mute in time. I apologize.
Listen, Ellie, can I make a couple of statements here? I'll be really short.
Sure.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah.
When we used to have these forums, the chat was always left open, and I know sometimes it gets away from you and you like to be on top of it, and anybody who has it off key comment and blah, blah, blah. But if you leave the chat open, you'd be surprised. People do listen to these forums, and some of the comments that people make are really, really excellent as far as statements that the speaker...
That's great, but it doesn't work for me because
Why?
I want to pay attention. This is my call, number one. Number two, I want to give a good interview. I want to give him my full attention. I want to be able to think. Because it's my call, and that's how I do it. If I'm going to interview somebody important like that, I want to give them my full attention. You know, I was not ever trained even before to have a board going while you're interviewing somebody. That's something different. It takes away from the interview, and that's my opinion. And I'm not going to argue about it. I'm not doing it. If you want good guests and you want a good interview, I have to give up the chat during that time.
Yeah, but a lot of the people who are in these calls are interested in what he has to say, and they can expound on what he says, and they can also come up with some wonderful comments as it goes along. This is what I've seen. You're right. It is your call. You do exactly what you want, but I think that you're losing out by doing that. I think you're losing a lot of information. And the
you know what?
thing
I don't
that
even have time. You know, like there's all the questions I think about for everybody. When I'm thinking about the questions, I'm thinking for everybody. What would benefit everybody? And we didn't have enough time. Oh, I'm just not in the mood for this tonight. I don't feel good. I really don't. I really don't.
I don't
want to hear
either.
criticism.
I've been hit
okay, I'm
for
going to mute
weeks.
you then. I'm not in the mood. I'm not in the mood for you tonight.
Wait a minute. Let me finish. Let me finish.
Okay, I'll let her finish. Go ahead.
Can I say something?
Let me finish. Listen, he said something very important that I think that we should all pay attention to. And one of the things that I have long stated on these calls that has been behind a lot of our targeting is the very wealthy. Now, I